All right, let's dive right in. We're about to take a tour through the fascinating and, yeah, sometimes kind of weird world of psychology. We're going to tackle the biggest question of all. What is it that makes you, well, you? I mean, really, have you ever just paused and thought about it? Why some days you feel like you can take on the world and other days you can barely get out of bed? What is it that makes you happy or sad or really angry? These aren't just late night thoughts. They are the exact questions that a whole field of science is dedicated to answering. And that field, of course, is psychology. It's basically the scientific mission to figure out our minds and our behavior. Now, it's really important to get this straight. Psychology zeroes in on the individual. It's not sociology, which looks at big groups and societies, and it's not psychiatry, which is a branch of medicine that treats mental illness. Psychology, it's the science of you. So what's so cool about psychology is that it isn't just one single monolithic idea. You should think of it more like having a toolbox, but instead of wrenches and hammers, it's full of different lenses. Each one gives you a totally unique way to look at the human mind. And over the years, we've collected quite a few of them. You know, the journey to understand ourselves really started way back with philosophy. You had thinkers like Descartes asking if the mind and body were two totally separate things, and John Locke, who famously suggested we're all born as a blank slate. But things got serious, scientifically speaking, in 1879. That's when a guy named Wilhelm Wundt opened the very first formal psychology lab. That was it, the official birthday of modern psychology. And from there, wow, the field just exploded with competing ideas. So in the early 20th century, you basically had two heavyweights in the ring. In one corner, you had Sigmund Freud and the psychoanalysis. He was all about the unconscious mind, this idea that the real reasons we do things are buried deep inside us, shaped by our childhoods. And in the other corner, you had behaviorism, with guys like B.F. Skinner. They basically said, whoa, hold on, the unconscious, we can't see it, we can't measure it, so let's just ignore it. They focused only on what they could actually observe, our behavior and how it gets shaped by rewards and punishments from the world around us. So one was looking deep inside and the other was looking completely outside. But not everyone was buying what those two camps were selling. So a new movement popped up called Humanistic psychology, with people like Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. They thought the other views were way too negative. They brought a much more optimistic perspective, focusing on things like free will, personal growth, and our incredible potential to become our best selves. And right around then, the cognitive revolution kicked off. This brought the focus back inside the mind, but in a very scientific way. They started studying our mental processes, how we think, remember things, solve problems, basically treating the mind like a really sophisticated computer. But hang on, what about the brain itself? You know, the actual physical organ in our heads? Well, one of the most powerful pieces of evidence for the brain's starring role in who we are didn't come from a fancy lab. It came from a truly horrific accident. This is the unbelievable story of Phineas Gage. Back in 1848, an explosion on a railroad sent a huge iron rod straight through his head. It completely destroyed a big chunk of his brain's frontal lobe. And he lived. But here's the thing. He wasn't Phineas Gage anymore. The guy who was once responsible and well-liked became impulsive and totally unreliable. His personality had been fundamentally altered. This tragic accident became one of the first solid pieces of proof that who we are, our very personality, is physically wired into the structures of our brain. Okay, so we've got all these different lenses: biological, cognitive, behavioral, you name it. But how do they actually work when you apply them? Let's take a huge topic, something we all think about, and see how psychology approaches it. Personality. What actually makes you, you? When it comes to personality, psychologists have generally looked at it in two different ways. The older ideas were type theories. They love to put people into neat little boxes. You're either an introvert or an extrovert. Simple, right? But modern psychology has pretty much moved on to trait theories. These see personality as a spectrum. So you're not just one or the other, you actually fall somewhere on a sliding scale that goes from very introverted to very extroverted. And today, the most scientifically accepted model is what's known as the Big Five. Super easy to remember with the acronym OCEAN. This model says that most of our personality can be mapped out across 5 core dimensions. Openness to experience, which is how curious you are. Conscientiousness, how organized. Extraversion, how outgoing.
Agreeableness, how friendly and compassionate, and Neuroticism, which is all about emotional stability. The idea is that every single one of us scores somewhere on the spectrum for each of these 5 traits.
So you might be thinking, how do they come up with this stuff, like the big 5? It's really not just one super smart person having a eureka moment in the bathtub. The real story of psychology, and pretty much all science, is that it's a team sport built on a very strict process.
I think Isaac Newton nailed it when he said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." A breakthrough from one scientist is almost always standing on top of a mountain of work from countless others who came before. It's this massive ongoing conversation happening across generations.
And the rule book for that conversation is the scientific method. It's a really systematic process. You start with a testable prediction, a hypothesis, then you design a careful experiment to see if you're right. You analyze the data, and then you draw your conclusions. But, and this is the most important part, you have to publish your results so that other scientists can try to do the exact same experiment and see if they get the same results. That process of replication and peer review is what separates good science from just a good story. Okay, we've talked history, different theories, the scientific method, but let's get down to it. Why should you care about any of this? How does this stuff actually show up in your life? How do you put psychology to work? Honestly, the applications are literally everywhere. Just understanding a few basic psychological principles can make a huge difference. It can improve your relationships when you learn about things like empathy and active listening, actually hearing someone instead of just waiting for your turn to talk. It can help you manage tough emotions like stress and anxiety. And maybe, most importantly, it can give you the self-awareness you need to actually grow as a person. And it's not just personal stuff. Professionally, psychology is an absolute powerhouse. In education, it helps teachers figure out the best ways to teach different kinds of learners. In business, it's the secret sauce behind leadership, teamwork, and even marketing. It's vital in healthcare for helping people stick to healthy habits. And in sports, it's all about building the mental toughness that separates good athletes from great ones. So, from the tiny neurons firing in your brain to the complex dynamics of a huge company, it all comes back to this one single field of study. A field with endless applications all aimed at understanding the most complicated subject on the planet, us. By getting a handle on the forces that shape how you think, feel, and act, you're essentially getting a user's guide to yourself. We've just taken a quick peek inside. The real question is, what are you going to do with what you've seen?